Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special spoiler discussion on Dune, Part 1. This is the new Dune movie, 2021, directed by Denis Villeneuve. All right, do we get that, everybody? It's two syllables for each name. All right? Okay, cool. Oh, I guess I should say I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Connor Nielsen. I'm joined by the Comics Kid 2099. How are you doing, Comics Kid?
I'm doing very well. I hate that you corrected me on how to say it because I was going to make a whole joke about how since he's French, that we could call it Mondune instead of Mondieu. Um, but anyway, I now that I have successfully burned all my bridges with the French, I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing very well today. Yeah, we are talking about the 2021 Dune film starring Timothy Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, Stellan Skarsgård, Jason Momoa, Zendaya, Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem, and others. So, Comics Kid, why don't you tell us about the plot of Dune?
Okay. This is, if you've read the book, this is roughly the first half of the book. You've got the Emperor of the Universe, and then you've got all these other noble households that each are in control of a different planet. And the Atreides house, led by Oscar Isaac, they are in charge of Caladan, which is a luscious, water-filled planet, and they are told you are going to have to go to Arrakis, which is this hellish desert world with barely any water. Like you have to drink your own urine to survive. And so they have to go there, and like shortly after they get there, they are betrayed by, spoilers by the way, they are betrayed by the Emperor and also House Harkonnen, or Harkonnen. I've watched so much Dune over the last week, by the way. I rewatched the David Lynch Dune, which I had not seen since you and I talked about it last, which has been a few years. And then I watched not Children of Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, which was a 2000 miniseries, and it had a whole bunch of unknowns and William Hurt. And that was about 4.5 hours long. And then I watched this movie, which is about 2.5 hours. And so I like in my mind, I've jumbled everything together. I cannot remember like in which version does this line happen or how they pronounce it in either version. Because I know in one version they say Harkonnen and in one version they say Harkonnen. But anyway, House Harkonnen and the Emperor, they stab the Atreides clan in the back, destroying their entire house except for Paul, played by Timothy Chalamet, and his mom, the vampire from Dr. Sleep. They run out into the desert where they meet the Fremen, led by the bad guy from Skyfall and Pirates 5. And then they join the Fremen, and then that's it. And there's obviously a lot more going on that I didn't talk about in that brief synopsis, but if you are familiar with other versions of Dune, at least for me, what was most interesting about watching all three of these versions of Dune was like, oh, okay, they did this a little bit differently. I kind of like this version for doing it this way, but I like this other version for doing this in this way. So it's going to be interesting. Connor, you didn't go back and rewatch the David Lynch version, did you?
Not in the last week. I've gone back and watched that movie a few times since we've talked about it, though.
Okay.
And I've never seen the sci-fi miniseries, but I'm really happy that you took all the time to watch all this Dune because this will be a fun discussion.
I hope so.
I want to hear you talk about the differences.
Cool. Well, before I do, I have not gone back and listened to our podcast on the David Lynch Dune. What did you think of that movie, and has your opinion changed on it any?
So I go back and forth on the David Lynch version of Dune because it's like, on the one hand, it's not a very good movie. I've read the book too, I should say. I've read the book and I've gone back to the David Lynch version before this came out. On the one hand, David Lynch's Dune is not a very good movie. On the other hand, I kind of like it because I like it as this weird oddity where if you looked at the list of my favorite filmmakers and you had to like pick one out of a lineup, which is like, this person would not be very good at directing a big blockbuster, David Lynch would be the guy in that lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he made a giant blockbuster exactly one time. And it feels like a multi-million-dollar B movie where like the special effects are not very like there are some special effects in that movie that are terrible, like inexcusably bad by the mid 80s standards. Um, but at the same time, it's full of these very weird singular decisions that sort of make it distinct and unique and kind of cool. I like that all the Harkonnens have like bright red hair and they live on this like Oz planet that's like all green.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
like what's that?
I was going to say, if I've learned anything from watching David Lynch's Dune and Frank Herbert's Dune, the miniseries, it's that gingers are all evil. And if I've learned anything from watching Denis Benoit, watching his version, I know I butchered that. I'm sorry. It's that all Baldos are evil. Really, I'm glad we have these very distinct themes that I'm able to pick out, because usually I'm not good at picking out theme, but this time I was able to. Redheads and Baldos. I can't trust any of them.
Yes. That's a good observation. So I, yeah, so I enjoy the weirdness of the David Lynch version, but it's also a movie that like you can sort of watch in real time as a director loses control over their project, because the first half of that movie is pretty competent, and then the second half is basically just an hour-long montage. And
Yeah.
then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then baby Alicia Witt speaks like a demon, and it's awesome. And then like the big battle scene at the end of Dune is legitimately terrible. Like it is just people on a rear projected screen while they're riding a worm shooting, and then like shooting off screen, and then it cuts to reaction shots of people falling over, and like that's basically the battle scene for like 10 to 15 minutes. um but I don't know, like it's still a David Lynch movie. Like it's my Spider-Man 3, and what I mean by that is like there are people that, even though Spider-Man 3 is a bad movie, I know there are a lot of people that just like Sam Raimi and Sam Raimi's interpretation of Spider-Man, and like even though that's not a good movie, they still get some value out of it. Like that's my brother. My brother likes Spider-Man 3, even though he recognizes that it's not very good. And for me, that's what Dune is, where it's like I enjoy watching it as the cheapo B movie version of Dune that just happens to be made by David Lynch. So yeah.
Yes, I think I feel exactly the same way, even though I've only seen it twice or maybe three times. I don't know. But the first half I think is good, and then it's around the point when Paul and his mom join the Fremen that it just suddenly is like, go, 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 go. We have another 250 pages of book that we have to get through, and we've only got an hour. And then it's
Yeah.
just like, whoa, like you get whiplash from the pacing. And I think the best thing that this version, and also not I keep saying Children of Dune. There was a sequel to the 2000 miniseries that I have not seen. It was called Children of Dune. But anyway, what the 2000 miniseries and what this version both do is, what if we slowed down? And I should point out, it is not Frank Herbert. It is not David Lynch's fault that that movie is what it is. He, as you said, the higher ups kind of took control of it. He did not have final cut. Apparently he had like 4 hours of footage, and I will say I do not ever want to watch a 4 hour movie. When I watched the Snyder cut, I took like 2 or 3 days to do it. I think 3 days to watch it. And so like if you say, oh, it was intended to be a 4 hour movie, I would say no, get that out of the theater and make it a TV miniseries. I have no idea when Roots was, when the TV miniseries first kind of became a big thing, but like I think the sci-fi miniseries saying, let's stretch this out and like take our time, and this movie kind of doing the theatrical version of that, I think is a really smart move. Because like there are so many things like in the David Lynch movie. So the Duke, he has the tooth with the poison, and that's in all three versions and in the book. He tries to kill Baron Harkonnen, and he fails, but he does kill that one guy who is in the Halloween movies and Chucky. I can never remember his name. Wormtongue from The Lord of the Rings.
Brad Dourif,
Yeah,
baby.
yeah. Brad Dourif is in David Lynch's Dune, and so he is a mentat, which I don't think they ever explain in any of them what a mentat is. It's basically a human computer, and
They
so
do say it in a quick line of dialogue in the David Lynch version. It's
okay.
a line of dialogue that says, "Behold this planet, home of the mentats, the human computers. But at no point are you able to draw a connection between the mentats, like the characters that are mentats, and that explanation." So
Right. In the David Lynch version, it's people with really big eyebrows. In this version, the 2021 version, it's people with a little dot on their lip. So anyway, the Brad Dourif dies, and so then the Harkonnens are like, well, we lost our Mentat. We need a new one. And we just killed like everybody in House Atreides. Hey, we've got Thufir Hawat. He was their Mentat. So now we've poisoned him, and we've got this cat and a rat tied together in a machine of some kind, and you're going to need to milk the cat in order to survive, and you are going to be our new Mentat. And that's in the book. Well, not the cat and the rat thing, but like the idea that we're going to force you to work for us, and if you don't, you'll die of poisoning. That's in the book. But in the David Lynch movie, after that scene, you never see Thufir Hawat again. And in the sci-fi miniseries, you don't get that at all. We don't know what happened to Thufir Hawat. And like in this movie, I'm assuming that that idea is going to pop up in Dune Part Two, but or Tune. But like with the David Lynch version, you'll have all these scenes, and then they'll either just skip right over something pretty important, or they'll add a lot of like you said, it's a montage, and you'll have narration explaining something, and it's you feel bad for David Lynch because I think he could have made a really good Dune if he had done what this movie is doing and split it up into two films. I don't know if they would have let him do that. And if he had made a successful movie, like what would his career have been like? Would he have gone on to make other blockbusters, or would he want to do more personal stuff like everything else he's done? It's a really interesting idea. But yeah, so I think you and I are pretty much on the same page when it comes to David Lynch's Dune. What did you think of this movie?
so it's interesting because with David Lynch's Dune, like you and I differ. Like you're not a David Lynch guy. I very much am, and I can still look at David Lynch's Dune and be like, this is, I think, easily David Lynch's weakest movie, but I still kind of get something out of it. Uh, it's crazy that like these are the two like film versions of Dune, because this second Dune movie is like also very much the film made by its director, and I think it's pretty darn good, but like it's so different from the like the 80s movie, because it's like it's the same source material and a lot of the same events happen, but just how the directors adapt the material is just indicative of the filmmakers, and I think that's really cool. I like this movie. I think I like it more than it's a better movie than the David Lynch version. Um, Although I will say, I think there are like small moments in the David Lynch version that I like more. But largely on a broader scale, just as an adaptation of the book, and it's just as like a cohesive tonal and narrative experience, I think they made the right choice, and I think this is a pretty consistent, effective movie. That being said, um, so you've seen Blade Runner 2049, and I've seen Blade Runner 2049. That's a movie I love. I think that movie absolutely rocks my socks. I didn't think a sequel to Blade Runner should even happen, and I think the fact that for me that it's even in the same league as the original Blade Runner is a miracle. But outside of Blade Runner 2049, I don't love any Denis Villeneuve film. I think I would give. So I've seen his 2010 movie Incendie. I've seen uh, Sicario, Arrival, and this. And all of those I would give like a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. And I think all of them are good, not quite great. I like them. I don't love them, but they are like these expertly made, really effective movies that like I absolutely get why people like them. And like if this is your kind of thing, it's like done really, really well. It's just that like usually when this director is doing his thing, it's just not really my thing. But I can admire and respect the craft of it. Like it's hard for me to like fully articulate. So it's like I watch all these movies and it's like and I listen to them and it's like, oh wow, this is really, really cool. But I kind of feel more like a spectator than actually getting immersed into the movie. But I liked it. But I'm mostly curious to know how you responded to it because you have read the book before, right?
Yes, but it's been a long time. And so like watching this, like I would remember there'd be little flashes of like there's this thing I vaguely recall in the book, and then I'm like, I don't remember which character did it or something like that. Or like I'd be reading the trivia about one of the movies and it would bring something up and I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen in a book and none of the movies. And so like it's been so long since I read the book that I am essentially not even gonna bring it up unless there's like the one or two things. But like I've read the book, but it's been a very long time. I kind of want to go back and read it. I've got several of the Dune books. I think I have all of the Frank Herbert ones. I think he wrote five, and then he kind of ended it on a cliffhanger, and then he died. And so his son and Kevin J. Anderson wrote like a whole bunch more. And I have heard that the consensus among Dune fans is that the Frank Herbert stuff is where it's at, and anything written by Kevin J. Anderson or Brian Herbert is not very good. And I haven't read any of those. I haven't even read any of the other Frank Herbert books.
Yeah, I own all of the Herbert books. I don't own any of the others.
And have you read any of the other Herbert books?
I have not. I own all six of them though. They last year they had in print all of them in the new editions, and I thought they looked pretty cool, so I nabbed them. I was
Okay.
reading the first book. I was enjoying it. How did you feel about 2021's Dune Part One?
Uh, I liked it. I think because you had asked me if I wanted to talk about this, that it was on HBO Max. It's not any longer. We waited on that, and that's on me because I wasn't a big fan of Blade Runner 2049, and I want to go ahead and say the reason is because the reason I like Blade Runner, it's not because of the philosophy or the pontification. It's not any of that. I like it because it's Indiana Jones punching robots, and like that was what I got out of that movie. And so with the Denis version of Blade Runner 2049, it was not the thing that I was interested in with the first Blade Runner. So I was mostly just really bored with that movie. I felt like it went on way too long, and I was not looking forward to watching Dune. And then I did, and I think it does a really good job of taking the basic stuff from the book and pacing itself. I think pacing is a really important difference in all the versions that I've watched. And so I think it's a very good incomplete movie. And I understand that I am like kind of I'm putting the director between a rock and a hard place because I am saying like that he hasn't finished the story. But also, if he did try to finish the story, it would have been way too rushed, like the David Lynch version. And so, right now, I'm like, yeah, this is a pretty good first half of a story. And you look at something like, I don't know, like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies 2 and 3. I feel like that is one story that they chopped in half and then added like 3 hours of fluff into it. And I feel like the best, if you were going to watch those movies, the best way to do it would be to watch like one on one night and one on the other. You have something like Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. It ends on a cliffhanger, but I feel like those are separate movies. I don't feel like you're losing, you know what I'm saying? Like I think
Yeah,
with
yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you.
like Infinity War has its own characters and its own cast you're following, and then Endgame mostly is following a different group of characters. And so I felt like they were two complete stories, and one of them happened to end on a cliffhanger. With this, I there is a whole lot of someday, Paul, you are going to do something really important. You are going to be a really important guy. Not today, not in this movie. And so it's a whole lot of setup. And that is by design. Like that's in the book. You know, in the book, it's a slow burn of getting Paul to being what he is going to be in the next movie. But just watching this, like if you had never read the book and you just watched this movie, if you've never seen any of the other versions of Dune, you might be a little disappointed with where it ends. Maybe.
Yeah, I was spending a lot of the time watching this movie, wondering where they were going to end it because I have read the book and I've seen the other versions. Like I know the story, and that was what was kind of interesting is that the pacing of this movie is really, really good, but I was also kind of feeling like you could end it right here, and then it kept going. I was like, oh, cool. Okay, we're still going. All right, they're probably gonna end it right here, and then it kept going. I was like, oh, and you can end it right here, and then it kept going, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So yeah, it's one of those things where like I know I saw this interview where it was for the Directors Guild of America. Like I guess they had a screening of this movie, and then afterwards, Christopher Nolan interviewed Denis Villeneuve, and uh, basically what had happened was that so the director loves the book, and he was saying that like the book was like his favorite book growing up, and how he and his friend they would like draw storyboard sketches about like what would happen if they ever got to one day make like a Dune movie. And he likes David Lynch but doesn't like that movie very much because he feels like it just kind of gets away from what that book is. And so he was very much approaching this material from the perspective of somebody who wanted to very faithfully adapt the book. And I think he does a really good job of capturing the tone of the book, and like I don't know, like the pacing and the tone and the atmosphere. Like it does a good job of translating the experience of what it's like to feel like what it is when you're reading the book as it is to watching the movie, because the book is a legendarily hard thing to adapt. Because I think the reason why that is there's like no mystery in the book. Like in the book, they just straight up tell you right off the top, oh yeah, Dr. Yui's going to be a traitor,
Hmm.
and the Duke's going to die, and the Harkonnens are going to take back control of Arrakis, and it's going to be this big thing, and Paul will eventually become like this crazy leader. Basically, they just tell you all of that almost immediately in the book.
Because correct
And
me
the
if I'm wrong, in the book, you're getting at the beginning of each chapter, it's like a excerpt from like the life of Paul Atreides, and it's being narrated by Princess. I don't know. I always pronounce it Irulan, but in the miniseries they pronounce it Irulan. But the Emperor's daughter. And so like
yes,
so you get things like way before Dr. Yue betrays them. You'll hear like 1,000 depths is not good enough for Yue, and you're right.
yes.
Yeah, it kind of it does that a lot.
Well, yeah, because it's like each chapter starts off with like one of the writings of the princess,
Mhm.
and but it's all writings from like years after the events that you're reading. So it's this strange sort of thing, and like very quickly, like I started to pick up on why is she writing all of these things about Paul, and then I like, oh, he probably marries her,
Mhm.
and surprise, surprise, guess what happens at the end?
Yeah.
um,
And you
so
wouldn't know that watching the David Lynch version. That's another thing that they skip right over to political marriage in the David Lynch version.
yeah, at the end, it's very much just like, you want my daughter to like as a peace treaty? And he's like, yes. And then it's over, and everyone cheers, and it rains on Arrakis, which that doesn't happen in the book. With this version of the story, like I thought it does a good job of being a faithful adaptation while also being a movie that does have like suspense and twists.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Dr. Yue thing. That was one version, one thing. It happens in all three of the versions that I watched, and I feel like each one does it a little differently. In the
Yep.
David Lynch version, the Baron says, "I have a spy," and then I think Rabban says, "Well, who is the spy?" And he says, "No, no, no, I'm not going to tell you yet." And then you find out later it's Dr. Yue. And then in the miniseries, they also say we have a spy among them, and then you don't find out who it is in until the betrayal happens. The problem with the miniseries is, even though it's a much longer version of the story, you barely get to see Dr. Yue. And one thing I kind of had a problem with most versions of this story is that, like in the book, you're introduced to Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, Thufir Hawat, and Dr. Yue all at once. And I'm like, whoa, stop. Who are
Mhm.
all these people to Paul, and why are like what is Gurney Halleck's job? How is he different from Duncan Idaho? And that's something I still can't really answer. They're both soldiers who work for the Duke, and like I still don't know, and it could be that the book does a better job of explaining that, but like a lot of these will just kind of say, here's everyone in House Atreides. Now let's hit the ground running. And so, like in the miniseries, even though they don't tell you who the spy is, you don't get a whole lot of scenes with Dr. Yue in the miniseries. I do like that you get more scenes with him in the David Lynch version. But in this version, you don't find out that there even is a spy until Dr. Yue betrays them. And I do wish that we could have had the line from like the Baron or from the Beast Rabban. I wish we could have had like we have a spy among House Atreides, and then the audience is like, wait, who is it? Is it Jessica? Is it Gurney? Is it, who is it? Duncan Idaho? Like, is it Paul? Has he been mind wiped or something? Like, we don't know. And then you're on the edge of your seat. Like, what's his name? Alfred Hitchcock said, like, if you just have a bomb just explode, that's like, whoa, a bomb just exploded. But like suspense is when the audience knows that there's a bomb under the table, but the characters don't. And that, I think, telling us a good 30 minutes earlier that there is a traitor in the midst of the Duke, I think that would have been better. Because we do get a few moments with Dr. Yue, and like where he says, like if we had found out there's a traitor, and then Dr. Yue is talking to Paul right before he puts his hand in the box, and he says, be careful. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, they have their own plans. So just be on alert, Paul. And so it's like, okay, Dr. Yue cares for Paul. So clearly he can't be the traitor. And then, you can find out later, oh, he is. And like in the miniseries, they make a point of saying, well, it couldn't be Dr. Yue because he's got his suit. There's this thing on his head, and I guess the book does a better job of explaining this because none of these versions really do, but he has some kind of conditioning that he cannot break, or so they think. And then like in the David Lynch version, Brad Dourif even says, like, it was I who broke Dr. Yue. And so like I do think that's something they could have brought up a little bit more.
Yeah, so you bringing up that, I think, is one of the key distinctions between the different versions. And because it's like the book, they tell you right up, Yui's a traitor. In the David Lynch version, they make it kind of a mystery as to who the traitor is. And then in this one, there is no mystery. It's just, you don't even know there's a traitor until Doctor. So it's like, we found every way to skin this cat, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heard Denis Villeneuve say that he wanted to like make it this movie as if no other version of Dune had happened, or it didn't want to feel influenced at all by any other version of Dune. So, for example, like the reason I think why they had like the whole traitor subplot just kind of not really be a subplot until all of a sudden it is a subplot. I think the reason they did that is because if they did it the way the Lynch version did it, they didn't want it to feel like they were referencing the Lynch version with the way they adapted that. And I think he was just trying to find his own unique way of interpreting the story that he could. And he also had mentioned, or he didn't mention this, but what I get from this movie is that the way they're doing exposition in this movie is pretty dang smart, because the mythology is the reason why Dune is so hard to adapt. Dune is this weird, like, hyper involved story where so much of the political landscape and the world is already established before the events start taking place.
Mm-hmm.
So that when they do start taking place, it's it feels like he lived in a world where there's already like an agenda in place by several people, and Paul is just sort of becoming aware of the machinations of people who have been working their whole lives to become political leaders. With this movie, they just sort of the lore and the mythology and all the exposition, it's only really revealed to Paul when it's immediately important to him.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like half of the exposition they still haven't even gotten into yet. And I have the confidence they will get into it when they finally do part 2 in a couple of years. But with this, like, there's in the Dune mythology, there's the Council of Great Houses, and that's called the Landsraad. They say the word Landsraad in this movie exactly one time. And I don't think anybody not in on it will be able to draw a connection between when they say great houses, that's what the Landsraad is. But, it's one of those things where I think even though if I didn't know the material, I wouldn't be able to know what that is, I still could follow what was happening. So
Mm-hmm.
I think they did a good job of handling the exposition in that way. And I think that's why they handled like the Dr. Yue betrayal the way they did.
Yeah, and I won't say it breaks the movie. If I had any skills at like video editing or anything like that, I would love to take all 3 of these versions that I've watched this past week and take like the best of each version and make like some 4-hour supercut that's like the ultimate like Dune experience, and then like you're jumping between Jorgen Prochnow to Oscar Isaac to William Hurt, and then like if you've seen them all, then this is the Duke, even though it's 3 different actors. Like I'd love to do something like that. Because I understand that Denis wants to do his own thing and doesn't want to be reactionary or influenced by previous versions. Having said that, I still kind of wish we could have had like a quick line of "there's a traitor," and like you're right. Paul already knows what a mentat is, so there's no reason for Paul to say, "Hello, Thufir Hawit, the living computer who works for our family." Like, there's no reason to do that. But also, I kind of wish we could have had a little bit more of like, and in the books, you can have characters internally thinking, oh yes, the Mentat had been working for our family for 3 generations, and there's one scene in this version where we see the Thufir like roll his eyes in the back of his head, and he does a quick computation that's like impossible for a real human being to do. And I think if we could have seen like the Polka Dot Man do that on Gaiety Prime, I think is the planet that Gaiety Prime is where the Harkonnens are from, and so like if we could have seen him do that, then that would have been cool to be like, okay, there's a connection here between these guys, other than like there's a dot on their lower lip. So yeah, I agree that it does a pretty good job of introducing people who haven't read the book or but it's been a long time to this pretty dense mythology. But there still are a few moments where I kind of wish they could have done a little more.
Yeah, Oscar Isaac could roll up and he's like, "Hello, Lady Jessica. Please welcome Thufir Hawit. As you know, he is our mentat, the human computer, and we need these because computers are outlawed in the year 10,191 of the new calendar." Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. I yeah, because I don't know, like I think that as a story in and of itself, this is one of the more incomplete stories I've seen in some time.
Mm-hmm.
But because like even in this era of like franchise, even in that era, like I think people still generally do a pretty good job of making complete movies that set up for sequels and whatnot. Whereas this is just kind of just right up front about this is not the full story. But even in that, I do think there is some like symmetry to this part of the story that I at least appreciated, where it does feel like there's been a character arc for Paul throughout these events, even though the broader plot and like the story of what's going on has not been resolved at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because like and here's the thing about Denis Villeneuve movies, like all of them, Blade Runner 2049, the one I love, and the rest of them, which I just like, they all have like perfect endings, and I think this is no exception. Like, I don't know, when he's looking over and he sees like the person riding the worm, and he's like, "Desert power." I'm like, yeah, now we're talking. That's how you end a movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. Yeah, I like that. But yeah, no, I think this did a good job at least finding that symmetry for the character of Paul.
Yeah. I saw somebody on Reddit, and off the top of my head, I don't remember who it was, but they had suggested that they think maybe they would have liked it better if in this movie the protagonist was the Duke, and then Paul was, I won't say a background character, but like you could still get some hints of like what Paul is going to be later on. But like if this movie had been more focused on the Duke, do you think that would have worked, or do you think that would have been a bit of a mess?
I don't know. Like, I think as is, it did a pretty good job of feeling like an ensemble movie because I don't feel like Paul is really that much of a main character. I mean, he is like by the end of it, it does center itself on Paul, but he's like a pretty passive character because he's just the son of the Duke who's being kind of carted around from world to world, and he's
Mm-hmm.
not really allowed to do much or like participate in the political arena. So it's like it doesn't. I think it feels like an ensemble movie where the Duke is as much of a main character as Lady Jessica, who's as much of a, and like Paul, I think does have a little bit more of the scales tipped in his favor, but he doesn't feel like Luke Skywalker to me.
Right. Um, and I'm not gonna say that this movie that it was a deal breaker, that like so much of it was, one day, Paul, you're gonna be really important, but not right now. And like if I hadn't read the book and if I hadn't been as familiar with if I hadn't watched the David Lynch version and the miniseries, I might have been a little bit more put off by like there's a whole lot of someday this guy's going to be important, but not right now. I would have been more put off by that if I wasn't familiar with the story beforehand. But as is, I do like this movie. I'm not going to say that I disliked it. But since we're talking about Paul, I think this does, no offense meant to Kyle MacLachlan, I think this movie does a much better job of making Paul feel like more of a real person. And that's kind of tricky to do because you've got all these different people with these superpowers in this universe. You've got Mentats who are living computers. And in the book, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Thufir says at one point that Paul would have made a good Mentat. And like he has the potential to be a Mentat. And then also, Paul has inherited powers from his mom, who is part of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, and they can maybe see into the future, or at the very least, they can control people with their voice, kind of, a Jedi mind trick type thing. And Paul has somewhere along the way has inherited the power to see visions of the future. And when you give a character all of these godlike abilities, it's very difficult to also make them feel like a human. And I feel like Kyle MacLachlan, he's saying all the lines, but he doesn't feel like he has much presence in the story. Like he does, the miniseries, I think goes too far in making Paul be this petulant little brat who's always whining about like, I don't want to go to Arrakis. And so like, and it's weirder because they also cast this guy who I think was in his like late 20s. And so like, it doesn't feel like he's like a teenager, but it feels like he's playing a teenager. With this, I think they struck gold by casting Timothy Chalamet because he looks so much younger than what he is. He's 26, but this is the first time where I felt like Jessica could have actually been the mom of Paul because Kyle MacLachlan doesn't look like. I think there is an age gap between Kyle MacLachlan and the lady who played Jessica in David Lynch's version, but they don't look that much different. Like there doesn't look like there's a.
Well, yeah, because Kyle MacLachlan looks like a man,
Mhm.
even though he's like 21 when he plays Paul. Like he looks older than 21, and they cast one of the most well-aged women I've ever seen in my life in that role
Mhm.
of Lady Jessica, where like she looks like she's in her like early 30s, and I think that actress was in her 40s. So
Okay, yeah. So there is an age gap, but it doesn't look like it. And with here, there's only, I think Rebecca Ferguson is 12 years older than Timothy Chalamet, but he looks like he could be her son. So props to them for that. But I think this movie, of course, you haven't seen the miniseries, but I think this movie is a perfect balance between the David Lynch version and the miniseries, where Paul is at times he acts like a moody teenager, but then at times he is in a better mood. Like there's that scene where he just goes up to the guy and says, "Hey, what's up?" And the guy's like, "Get out of here. I'm watering trees." And like Paul is just meeting a guy and just chatting with him. And in the David Lynch version, like there's an assassin syringe that almost kills Paul, and then he grabs it and smashes it into the wall, and then the woman says, "It would have killed me." And he just casually says, "No, I was its target." And in the mini series, he kills the drone, and then he says, "That would have killed you." Like he's mad at this woman, and it's like she
oh
didn't
my
know.
god.
But in this one, he kills the drone, and then he says, "The operator is still in the building," and it cuts, and I'm like, "Oh, perfect." Like he's not upset. He's not like casual. Like this happens all the time. I think that Timothy Chalamet. Again, no offense meant to Kyle MacLachlan. I think Timothy Chalamet is the best Paul that I've seen.
Yeah, but I think I'm burying the lead here. How long have we been talking? And I have not deployed my little Fremen joke. Uh, um,
Excellent.
little Fremen starring Timothy Chalamet. Yeah, Timothy is one of those actors where like I first took note of him in 2017. Um, he was actually in the movie Interstellar, and I didn't remember him from that movie. He plays uh, Matthew McConaughey's son when he's still on Earth before he grows up to be Casey Affleck. But in 2017, he was in two movies. He was in Lady Bird and Call Me by Your Name, and I didn't like him in either of those movies. Mostly because I thought he was. I mean, he's supposed to be playing an unlikable jerk in Lady Bird, so he did a really good job. But
Mhm.
like, he is so unlikable in that movie. And Call Me by Your Name is just one of those movies where like I just don't get that movie, like at all. Like I don't understand what's happening in his character's head, and he's just kind of this mumbling teenager. And I was like, I don't like this kid. What's up with him? And why does everyone like him so much? I get he's very handsome, but like, why does everyone like him so much? And then like, it was like he had heard my complaints about his characters in the year of 2017, and then ever since then, he has just been turning in really good performance after really good performance. Like, I loved him in Little Women, and I really like him in this movie. And I think I'm on Team Timothy now, guys. So just just so like all of my lady friends can stop yelling at me because they have big crushes on him. I get it. I get it, ladies. It's cool. I like Timothy now. But yeah, no, he's great in this. And because this is like the weird thing about Denis Villeneuve movies is all of his movies have like a very similar tone. They all feel like this. And in every single one of his movies, like all of his actors are sort of giving these like reserved performances where they feel a little muted and a little toned down. But I always feel like people are giving good performances even though they are kind of like turned down a little bit. I don't know, like it's impressive that Denis gets the performances out of his actors that he does, even though like I usually associate this style of acting with like I don't know, like I usually when movies have this style of acting in it, I never remember the acting. But in his movies I do. And like even though it's pretty reserved, like you can see what's going on in Paul's head. And there's like, he gets one scene where he gets to freak out, but it feels earned. And like that scene is also memorable. It's not like every character has this big shouty Oscar bait clip, right? It's like it's I don't know, it's cool. And I think Timothy Chalamet does a good job of like carrying this movie as like the lead while not while not feeling like he's showing off as like a movie star. I don't know. It's a really good balance that he strikes. I liked him a lot.
Yeah. And I think Rebecca Ferguson does a really good job here because now correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a scene, because since I've watched 3 different versions of Dune so close together, is there a version in this one where he screams like, "You made me a freak," like, and he's like, "Okay, cool." They kind of sort of do that in the miniseries too. It's a little more toned down because that conversation happens like after the 2-year jump. Which in the miniseries, it's probably more like a 6-year jump because the little girl is much older than 2. But I think in the book, it jumps forward 2 years where Paul is kind of taken over to Fremen. And I am curious if that 2-year jump is going to happen, like if the next movie is just going to be 2 years later, or if we're going to see anything else and then do the 2-year jump in the movie, like Endgame. I'm curious if we're going to do
that. Would be weird because it's like, I think they'll do that the Endgame thing because like there's the character of like, what's his name? Chamis, what's his name?
the one that he kills.
Yeah, the one he kills. Like in the book, like they get back to the Siege, and then he like inherits his wife and kids, and he has to like take care of them now. He's like, oh crap! Like that's like a whole bunch of stuff that would be weird if you keep that character in this interpretation of it, and then all of the consequence that comes with killing that character is just like excised. That would be weird.
It would be difficult to keep the consequences of that even if you did a 2-year jump in between movies and Paul was like, "Oh hey, Chamis's wife," like that'd be difficult to like they could still be there, but you wouldn't know. Like you're right. And by the way, like that's not in him inheriting the wife and kids is not in any of the versions that I've seen. It's not in the miniseries or the David Lynch version. And you could argue maybe that's not super important, but I kind of hope that they do it. Just since we haven't seen it before, I'd like to see them play that out.
I would too, because it mirrors the Duke. Because like the Duke didn't marry Jessica because he tried keeping that position open of like for political reasons. Where he's like, I can't marry Jessica because that could an alliance could be struck through marriage, and so he always kept that open, and he has regrets about that. And now you could like have like this thing with Paul where he just sort of gets a wife thrown onto him, in the Fremen culture, and it's like that. But what he wants to be with Chani, you know what I mean? And so it's like it's a different thing you could do with Paul that it sort of it's like an inversion of what happened with his dad, because like his dad always kept being married open, and now Paul just sort of gets marriage taken care of immediately. Like it just sort of gets thrust upon him.
Yeah. We've all got problems, Paul. I wish that I had all these beautiful women being forced on me. I mean, no, I having 3 wives actually. Yeah.
It's not easy being Timothy Chalamet, you know.
Yeah.
Zendaya wants to be with me, but I have to be married to this other. Oh my word! Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So uh I liked Rebecca Ferguson. She's doing the crying thing. I don't know how actors do it, how they just summon the tears, but you know, when he's screaming at her like you made me a freak, and she genuinely feels hurt. Like you don't really get that, well, you don't get that conversation at all in the David Lynch version, and that conversation does happen in the miniseries, but it doesn't feel as emotional. It feels more like here's something we have to say so that we can get on to the next plot point. So I liked the exchange between them in this movie.
Yes, yeah, that was cool, and I like that. Is the tent scene in the miniseries?
Where they're inside the tent.
Yeah, it's sort of like after they escape the potential death by Harkonnens, but
Uh,
before they get to the ornithopter and meet Duncan Idaho and all that stuff.
uh, I'm trying to remember if it's there or not. I'm sorry, but I am drawing a blank. I know in this version, like it does a close up on the tent, and there's like water drops on it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so like when I saw that, I thought, what is this? Like, is this like the inside of a human being? Like, I was like, really, like, this is weird. I don't think we got to see the tent. We do get to see them like crash the copter and they're running from the worm, but I don't think we got to see them in the tent in the miniseries.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that scene, I really remember that reading it in the book, and I get why it's not in the Lynch version. Like that, it makes sense to just sort of have like all of that space where they're in an ornithopter, then they get out, then they're in a tent, then they go to another place, and then they get into another ornithopter, and then that one crashes. Like Lynch, I think, does a good job of like kind of reducing and like truncating all that, where they're in the ornithopter, it crashes, they were given still suits instead of a tent, right? And then they meet the Fremen. That's a good way of truncating that. But I do like that scene in the tent a lot in the book. And I'm glad it's here because that's the first instance of Paul having his spice visions.
Hmm.
So I want to say though that I will say, as this is a much more consistent movie than the Lynch version. I think it's a better movie than the Lynch version. Uh, but when you're doing tripping balls on spice visions, I mean, come on, that's David Lynch's bread and butter. Those scenes are a lot better than the Denis Villeneuve versions. I think they're cool in this movie, but like I don't know, when they get weird and surreal in the Lynch version, and it's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I uh I like also another difference between the Lynch version and with the others. In the Lynch version, when they meet the Fremen, it's like, "Hey guys, come on in. The water's fine." And like they like Lady Jessica grabs Big Ed's throat, and then it's like, "Oh, you know the weirding ways." And like you don't get to see the weirding ways in the movie. They just have like sound guns. And then it's like, "Well, come on in. Like you're part of the family." And what I like about this, like it's in the book too, but I like about this and the miniseries is when they meet the Fremen, there's still danger. Like the Fremen are like, let's just take their water, let's kill them, and then be done with it. And the Stilgar, the leader, he's like, hold on a second, and so there's still, I like that. I like that they don't just finally, we've got allies. We're safe. Like it's still, the worm's not going to kill us, but this other guy might. Who he was in the Defenders. The whole time I was watching this, I was like, who is this guy? Where have I seen him from? He was a bad guy in the Defenders. Anyway, but I by the way, I had one laugh out loud moment in this movie. I don't know if it was meant to be funny, but when Stilgar first meets the Duke, as he's leaving, Paul says, "Why don't you come and eat supper with us or something?" And he says, like, duty it requires that I be somewhere else. And then he says in another language, he says, "I recognize you," and then he just walks away. I don't know why that made me laugh. Some things that I liked that were not, to my knowledge, were not in the book. Like Jessica has like sign language that she does with people. I thought that was really cool. Like when she's talking to Shadout Mapes, who is going to be the housekeeper, and she knows that Shadout has a blade, and she does like a hand gesture to her servant to be like, "Hold on a second, there may be danger, there may not." I thought that was kind of neat. I don't think that was in the books. It definitely wasn't in either of the other film versions.
hmm That was pretty cool. And that's one of those little touches that makes this world feel like a world that's lived in. And those are those little touches that I think is important to making a like a fantasy movie feel immersive. And that's what's really cool about this movie is it does feel very immersive. The way it's shot, the sound design, I think particularly, like it all sort of feels really cool and um, big and like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or Lawrence of Arabia in space, where like it does feel big, and that's pretty cool. Because that's like the one thing that I think the you should probably get really right if you're doing Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And David Lynch, God bless his soul, he was not put on this world to make big movies,
Mm-hmm.
and he feels out of his element doing the bigness of it. Even though, like, I still think there are some really cool moments in his like the worm showing up in both of these for the first time, where it eats the spice miner. I like the scene in both versions of it. And as an '80s movie, like, I mean, for an '80s movie, like, I think that stuff is handled really well, like from a visual effects angle, where the worm first shows up. It's a
Mm-hmm.
cool special effect.
Yeah, I assume what they did was they had like a thing of sand and somebody's hand is like inside a worm puppet and then it just comes out and like closes. I'm
Mhm.
assuming maybe that's not what happened, but
Well, that's not what they did, because like it's a miniature and you can't have miniature sand. So like
oh,
they had this, like, to get the scaling right, they had this big puppet, but they had like micro glass shards for
oh,
the sand, and it's like everyone had to wear a mask, and like a specific kind of mask, because if you breathe that stuff in, it's like deadly and you can't get it out.
yeah, yeah.
And so they, in order to get the scaling right, because like that's is so refined, it's like powdered glass basically.
Hmm.
um it's like even smaller than sand, and it's, yeah, I don't know, I saw like a whole thing about how they did it, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah. I and I guess you're right. This movie looks gorgeous. The scale feels appropriate. And also, yes, I've been thinking about this movie is Game of Thrones in space with less incest. The movie Trimmers is Dune but with rednecks. Um, and yeah, so have you seen Trimmers?
I have not. I hear that's
Okay.
actually a really good movie, and I should give it a watch.
It's not bad. And I'm not joking. Like it's got these giant worms, and if you walk on the dirt, then like there's a whole scene where they're on these giant rocks, and that's the only place they're safe. Like it really feels like somebody watched Dune and said, "What if we did that, but with Kevin Bacon as like a handyman?" Like, but yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other parts of the movie that I wanted to draw attention to. I liked Oscar Isaac. I think I saw something. I don't know if this was a joke or if this was from like The Onion, but somebody attributed a quote to him where he said, I'm finally in a good science fiction movie." We love to bash on the Star Wars movies. Okay. But I liked Oscar Isaac. I like that Gurney Halleck feels like a character. Like I said in the book and in the David Lynch version, you're introduced to all these characters all at once, and I don't know what the difference is between like Duncan and Gurney. Here, like Duncan is kind of, I won't say he's a goofball, but he's more lighthearted than Gurney. And Gurney, like at one point they say smile, and he's like, yeah, I am smiling, but he's not. So I like that they're able to uh, I don't know if that was Josh Brolin's idea or if that was the director's idea, but I like that they found a way to make all these characters feel unique.
Yes, and that was cool when, because I was talking with my good buddy Rasco. He watched both versions of the movie and was asking me questions about how it happens in the book, because he just assumed that the way it plays out in introducing Gurney and Duncan and Dr. Yui and all of those characters, like he assumed it played out the way it happens in this movie, because in the David Lynch version, it's Gurney, Thufir, and Dr. Yui all come and meet Paul when he's like sitting at the desk. And
Mhm.
that's the way it happens in the book, where they're talking about how he shouldn't sit with his back to the door, and how he could hear, and he knew who was coming just by the sound of the footsteps. Um, but because yeah, I don't know, Rasco just thought that it plays out the way it does in this movie, where you get one scene introducing all of, like, one scene each that introduces all of them. Like the scene where he's sitting at his desk, that's the one where we introduce Gurney, and then there's another one that introduces Thufir, and then there's another one that introduces Dr. Yui, because like to him, that way of doing it in the Lynch version and the way it's done in the book almost felt like a way of truncating all of that, but it plays really naturally when you watch it in this movie.
Yeah. Were there any performances that stood out to you other than ones we've talked about?
I think everyone's like uniformly really good. Like I liked Jason Momoa a lot in this, where I think he does a good job of sort of being like a kind of like a party bro, but like who can work professionally. Like it makes sense to me. Like the way he kind of plays it is like a I don't know, like a world traveler who is like um who's good at ingraining himself into cultures because of how likable he is, and
Mm-hmm.
people want to party with him or something. Like I don't know, like it kind of felt like that. Like I'm trying to think of an example, but I don't know, like he does a good job. But like I can buy this guy blending into any culture because he seems like a likable guy who has a lot of personality and charisma.
Okay. I would say Momoa might have been one of my least favorite performances. I don't know what his range is because I felt like he was just doing Aquaman again here, and I have recently been rewatching Game of Thrones season 1, and he mostly just speaks in a foreign language there, and you don't really get much of a chance to see him act. He mostly just has kind of a grimace, and so I don't know what his range is. But I did kind of feel like I had seen this performance from him before, but I found him to be a likable character. So I, applause to him for that. But I would say he was probably the one I liked least out of all of them.
Okay, yeah. He is doing his Jason Momoa thing, but he does kind of have that Arnold Schwarzenegger Stallone thing where he kind of does his thing, and he's kind of reliant on how he is used by his director, and I think
Hmm.
he's used properly. Speaking of actors who don't have a lot of range but are kind of reliant on their directors to help them out, Dave Bautista plays the
Hmm.
Beast Rabban. Fade Rotha Harkonnen is conspicuously absent if you know the source material. I have a theory. You remember that chapter on GD Prime where uh, it's Fade Rotha's birthday and he's fighting in like a gladiatory pit or a gladiator pit?
Yeah.
I have a hunch that's going to be the opening scene of the second movie,
Okay.
and that way it sort of like gives symmetry to that second film where it'll open with a sword fight and
Ah.
then end with a sword fight. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I really hope Dane DeHaan plays Fade Rotha. That's
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
that's what I hope,
Well,
because he
he's
kind of looks like he
he's
kind of looks
unlikable, so yeah. I
yeah
I'm sorry. I've never liked Dane DeHaan in anything I've seen. I always feel like he kind of plays a smarmy jerk, so he would be
yeah
perfect for Fade, right?
yeah, Fade Rotha. I kind of think of him as like, what if Paul Atreides had AIDS, and that's kind of like what Dane DeHaan looks like. He looks like Timothy Chalamet's Tethered. You know, that's a reference to the movie Us.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
you're tethered. But very
and
quickly,
oh yeah, go ahead.
just wanted to quickly throw out there. I did like Dave Bautista in this movie, and I thought it was pretty bold of them to like put Jeff Daniels in a fat suit and credit Stellan Skarsgård. So that was interesting.
I I will say I think this was the best introduction to he's got the hover technology. In the David Lynch version, it's just comical. Really, the Harkonnens are played as like comically evil in the David Lynch version and in the miniseries. And in the books, they are evil, but I don't feel like they are comically evil in the books. They do feel like a threat, whereas here, they're like wahaha, I'm evil in the other versions. In this one, I like they feel like a threat, but you're not laughing when you're watching the Harkonnens, and I like that. And so that scene where I think it's right after the Bene Gesserit mother tells them to leave Jessica and Paul alone, and then it's like, well, we're not going to kill him, but we'll just throw him out in the desert. And then like he's rising up. I thought that was really cool. It it might be a little confusing to somebody who doesn't know that he cannot walk, and so he has the hover share thing to kind of help him get around. But I thought it was a really cool intro to that, knowing what was coming.
Yes, I really like the Harkonnens in the David Lynch version. I like how goofy they are. I love the the Baron. I like the Baron when he doesn't get killed by the tooth attack, or I guess I should say the tooth when I'm talking about the David Lynch version. But when the glee he has when he's alive is so funny. Where he's like, "I'm alive, I'm alive," and he just keeps saying that.
When Pete from Twin Peaks comes in and he says, "I'm alive," and yes, my lord, you're alive. I really want to take a screenshot from David Lynch's Dune and have him say, "Fellas, don't drink that coffee. There was spice in the percolator." Also,
right.
I'm imagining like when Dr. Yue brings in the Duke, and the Baron is like, "Oh, you brought the Duke, Doctor. Thank you." And he says, "Oh yeah, he wasn't any trouble. He just had a little bite." And then like he's like looks at the Duke like, yeah, had a little bite. Um, I
I like I just wanted to quickly say, like, I like in this movie how kind of creepy the Baron is, where
mhm,
he's like hiding from the gas by like cradling or like getting into a fetal position on the ceiling. That was
mhm.
like a kind of cool, unusual way of doing that.
Yeah. Um, I So there were two things about the Harkonnens that I was thinking about. Well, one thing is more just a general thing, but I did think it was a little silly because when Oscar Isaac blows out the poison gas, it like immediately fills like the entire room, and they're like closing the door, and like five people all fall down, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of poison gas for like one little tooth. Like in the other two versions, it's like he blows out some gas, like. In the other version, I think in the David Lynch one, he thinks that he's face to face with the Baron, but he's actually face to face with Piter, Brad Dourif,
Yes.
and so that's
Yes.
what like it kills Piter, but it doesn't kill like everybody in the room. And I think I like that a little better. I like when he just blows out like I mean it's like enough gas to fill like my entire house. I was like, whoa, that did seem a little comical to me.
Yeah. Oh, one of the things they cut out of this version is Peter DeVries' infatuation with Lady Jessica.
Yeah, because he doesn't meet her, does he?
I don't think he does. Yeah.
And yeah, that's I don't. I guess the maybe I mean, the movie was already getting 2.5 hours long. I feel like, again, I'm never going to watch the Snyder Cut again. That's a 4 hour film. Like, I think 2.5 hours is about the limit for me. Like, since I was watching this on HBO Max, I paused it several times to, like, go stretch my legs and stuff. So maybe they were thinking, like, well, we have to cut something, or otherwise it'll get too long. But I do wish that Piter could have had more scenes in the movie.
Me too. Because when I heard the cast and I didn't see, I didn't really initially look at who was playing who. When I heard that Polka Dot Man was in this movie, I thought, oh, he's playing Peter DeVries, right? And he was, and I like that's really good casting. But I was kind of bummed that he didn't get a little bit more to do. But
I
he's fine.
actually, when the Beast Rabban comes in and he's screaming like the Emperor took our Arrakis from us, and then Polka Dot Man says like, "Do you think that's a good thing that he gave it to the Atreides?" At first, I thought that was Fade. I was like, "Oh, okay, like here's someone who has some dialogue, so this is clearly probably Fade." Because like in the David Lynch
Yeah.
version, especially like Fade and Fade and Rabban are like they're always together, it seems like anytime one of them is on screen the other one is on screen, and that's something that the miniseries I think did a pretty good job showing, that there was even among House Harkonnen there wasn't necessarily unity, like in the miniseries, and I don't remember if this happens in the book, you'd have to remind me, but in the miniseries Fade actually tries to assassinate the Baron at one point, and also like they're talking about how we've got this plan, like after the Atreides family is all wiped out, then Rabban is left in charge of Arrakis, and the Baron actually wants him to basically do a bad job so that Fade can come in and kind of air quotes save the day and look like a hero, and then they can hold on to Arrakis because they'll be like, well, Fade is not as bad as Rabban. But in the David Lynch version and what little we see of the Harkonnens here, they're more all together.
Yes, that's what it appears to be. Maybe that whole like uh, kind of using Rabban as a pawn. Maybe that'll be like part of like a secondary subplot in the second movie.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking it will. I'm hoping anyway.
Yeah, and then like you can maybe they'll kind of do that where that can be seen as like a an alternate version of what's happening with the Paul rising in the ranks of the government of the Fremen, or like kind of, I guess not an official government, but you know what I
Hmm.
mean, like leadership of the Fremen.
Yeah. Um, I will say, I like the effect of the shields. When you watch the David Lynch movie, it looks like the video game Minecraft, where these
Yeah.
like square rectangle people like touching each other, and it looks weird. And maybe they just, I don't know. I don't know what other like effects that they could have used like from that era. I like what it looks like here, where it's just a brief flash of blue and then it goes away. Um, Having said that, I think I'm a little confused about how a shield does and does not work, because there is a line that I think it's in the book, I think, and it's in all three versions, where when Paul is training with Gurney, Gurney says the slow blade pierces the shield, or something to that effect. And then we see like Duncan Idaho is just slashing through people like a Star Wars prequel Jedi, and like they all have shields, and then like the Duke gets blasted by one of those little whirly darts that's going pretty fast, and it pierces his shield. And so I'm a little confused, like, what is the point of having a shield if it's just gonna like go through it anyway? And like at one point, Duncan, one of those whirly darts kind of hits him in shield, and he's able to like, it slows it down, and he's able to like get it off of him. And like with the Duke, he was shot in the back and he wasn't able to reach it. But I'm still confused about, like, because they say in the books, if you have a shield, you can penetrate it if you're moving the blade slowly. And so like just a helicopter or something probably wouldn't work. But like here, I get the feeling that like the shields don't do them much good.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think like the whirly darts, they're like technology where it's designed that when you fire it at a shield, it will get stuck in it. I think that's why they have like the long noses on them.
Okay.
That's just sort of me picking up on just kind of intuition. I don't even know if my intuition is correct there. Um, but yeah, no, like the shields are kind of funny because like I was thinking the same thing when Duncan is just slashing through people at the end. I was thinking, wait a minute, this
Hmm.
doesn't add up. But I thought it was funny because like they do a really good job of visually showing you how a shield works, where Gurney picks up the blade, like kind of tries slashing his wrist a couple of times, but the shield prevents him from doing it, and then he
Hmm.
like does start moving it slowly through the shield, and it's like, oh, cool. Visually, you have shown me that the slow blade penetrates the shield, and then he says, "The slow blade penetrates the shield." I'm like, yeah, I know. You just showed me that.
Hmm.
um, but there was something that was in the book that I like that I don't think it's in any screen version of Dune, and I get why it's not, because I think, is Chamas even in the the miniseries?
Yes,
Okay.
he's briefly in it. Like he when they first ambush Paul and Jessica, Paul gets the better of him, and then like one scene later, he calls out Paul and wants to fight.
Okay. Because in this version they do the fight, and Paul kills him, but what I like about the book is that that fight is cool because Paul his entire life is trained to fight with shields, and they don't have shields,
Right.
and so like he keeps getting his blade close and then slowing down, and like everyone thinks that he's just toying with him and like being an arrogant fighter and being like a jerk, and Paul's like, no, I'm just so used to fighting people with shields.
Hmm.
um and that's not in this, and I get that. Like I don't know how you can like translate that in a way where you don't have somebody on the sidelines going, Paul's used to fighting with shields his whole life, that is why he is slowing down when he is swinging his sword. um
Yeah, I
I don't
think
know.
you could have done it because what's his name from Pirates of the Caribbean 5? He says like, is he toying with him? And she says, no, Paul has never killed a man before, which is true. But she could have said Paul is used to fighting with shields, and then that just leave it at that. Like, and I think that you could have done that. You wouldn't have to have like a huge info dump, but just a quick one I think would have been fine.
Yeah, yeah, but I think also just from like a choreography angle, it would be weird to watch that.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have less suspense of like the immediacy of how like strategic they have to be when they're swinging their blades. I will say though, I like the way they do the visions thing because in the book, the way they describe him having visions would be like impossible to visually represent, where he like sees all of these different possible futures, but the way they kind of explain it is like he sees the events happening on a landscape where like he can't see where some of the features go because they dip down into like a crevice or they dip down behind some kind of hill or they go behind a rock or something, but he can see like where they eventually come up, but he can't see everything that happens. And I don't know, it's a cool way of describing it, but like I don't know how you could visually represent that. um but in this movie, the way they kind of do it is that they feel like dreams in a cool way, where you see him having this relationship before he meets Chamas. He seems to be having this very like friendly relationship with Chamas, and then he's dead. And that's cool because then like I know from reading the book and the other movie that he ends up having that friendly relationship with Stilgar, but in this vision he's having it with another person. And maybe that is a possible future. Maybe that's the actual future that he was seeing, just sort of like combined. The reason he's seeing Javier Bardem as this other guy is because, that guy is important to his future, but not because he's friends with him, but because he kills him. And maybe him killing that guy is the reason why he becomes friends with Stilgar. You know what I mean? Like there's like kind of those little like details to read into, like it is a dream that you're interpreting.
Yeah. And that is a little bit touched on in the miniseries where like Gurney Halleck, when he finds out that Lady Jessica is still alive, he thinks that she is the one who betrayed House Atreides and he tries to kill her. And Paul is kind of moping about it, saying like, I didn't see that in my visions. And so it's a good way of you've given this guy a lot of powers. It's a good way to say he's not completely omnipotent, that he has visions, but they're not perfect. Things might still go a different way.
Right. Um,
Um,
it was
uh,
probably a good idea to not call to not say jihad the way
yeah,
it's said in the book, because I think when the book was written, that was still an exotic word that nobody really knew about.
well, and the book was written in the 60s. Like with that word now, it's kind of associated with like Islamic extremism, and that didn't really kick off until like the 80s or 90s, right?
Yeah, and like I was born in '95, so I heard that word all the time post 9/11.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, you're right. And I will say Frank Herbert is not being subtle. He like you've got a group of desert dwellers and they have a culture that is not understood by these other people who come in, and there is a commodity in their home that these foreigners want to mine and use. Oil. Like it's not subtle. I didn't necessarily pick up on that when I first read the book, but once you've consumed as much Dune as I have this past week, I'm like, oh, okay, the Middle East, I get it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, you trying to not using that word. That's probably you're right. That's probably fine. Um,
Anything else you wanted to touch on with this movie?
I don't think so. I don't really um I liked it. I don't. I'm
Well,
not being like super. I know we've talked for a while about it, but I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I think that the pacing is key. Like when you have a 500-page book, like doing a TV series or doing like splitting it up into two movies. When I think a lot of people kind of complained after Harry Potter divided up the last book into two movies. You started seeing that a lot, like with the Hunger Games, with the Twilight movies. They started doing that, and people were complaining, like the Hobbit. I think this is an example where it's acceptable. Like there's so much going on in the
yes.
books, and even if you just cut it down to here's the events that are happening, it's going to feel very like the cliff notes. Like you can read the cliff notes and you can get the highlights, but when you read the actual story, and it's like, oh, there's a whole lot more going on here. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm
I mean,
really glad.
that's what the David Lynch version is. It's like it's just the stuff that happens kind of broadly, and that's it.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this movie does a better job of kind of taking its time and again, I wouldn't want to just sit down like in 2 years when we get the rest of this story. I wouldn't want to sit down and watch both versions back to back. That would take like a good chunk of the day. But I'm assuming that the next one will also be about 2.5 hours long, maybe a little longer. But I like that we're able to get kind of a slowed down version of this story that is familiar to people already.
And I'm glad people seem to be liking it. I guess my last thing I wanted to say is I really like the music in this movie a lot. It makes bagpipes sound cool. And that's something I never thought I would ever say in my life.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I don't think that there are going to be any other new releases. Well, there is Shang-Chi, which is now on Disney Plus, and so we'll be talking about that in a couple weeks. I had forgotten about that one.
Yes, yeah. I'm interested to chat with you about that one. That'll be interesting.
Okay, yeah. So I guess until then, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you guys in the future. Have a good one.